Welcome back to The Line. Laura Paskus, environmental reporter for the NM Political Report, wrote an interesting article recently about what long-term impacts President-elect Trump's appointments would have on New Mexico, especially in light of the state's millions of acres of federal land and abundance of oil and gas and other natural resources. And for example, the CEO of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson, you might have heard about. He's Mr. Trump's pick for Secretary of State. Former Texas Governor Rick Perry, his choice for head of Department of Energy. The article pointed out that Mr. Perry has deep connections with oil and gas, and ExxonMobil has in fact countered warnings made by climate scientists on the link between carbon emissions and climate change. Now, Mary, Laura Paskus focused on the environmental impacts, so let's start there. Anything that jumps out at you when you think about our vast fifth largest state in the union, our resources, everything? I mean, this is what we do.
Right.
Our tourism, everything is about our environment.
Right.
How concerned are you with?
Very concerned.
Okay.
I'm very concerned. And, you know, you just have to hope for the best. When I was preparing for this, you know, I wasn't a supporter of the incoming president, but you just have to hope for the best and hope that he's got some smart people and that our legislators and our congressmen and our senators are going to keep a check on what's important here in New Mexico.
Right.
Very concerned about the Department of Energy, especially since he wants to get rid of it. You know?
Right.
And so it's just it is a huge concern.
What do you make of the idea that, I mentioned Rex Tillerson, and there was some, not just Laura's piece certainly, but there's been others, that the folks at ExxonMobil, their own scientists were very concerned about climate change and the impact of climate change on their business, their fossil fuel business.
Right.
And it basically got swept under the rug and everyone just kind of kept moving forward. Does that bode well for you, for someone running that department?
It does not bode well, and then especially with the story, which I don't know if it's true or not, that the Trump transition team said, we want to know everybody that's working on climate change, you know, that little hit list. And I don't know if that, and because the Trump campaign team said, well, that we didn't want that to happen or it shouldn't have happened. That's very concerning because that's what a lot of people at Sandia are working on. Our people, our employees are working on. So that's very concerning.
Interesting point there. Sophie, concerns, environment, starting with environment, staying with it. What do you think?
I think one of the real concerns that Laura Paskus brought up in her, I thought, excellent article, please do go look it up, is the, you know, the large number of tribal lands that we have in New Mexico. A push from the Trump administration first to privatize tribal lands, and right now that they're held by the government on behalf of the tribes under a treaty. The tribes are their own sovereign nation.
Let's talk about that for a sec. That, for folks watching, they may not be aware that that's kind of shocking that there's been recommendations out there out of this administration to privatize.
To privatize Indian lands.
Right.
There's also a push to move federally controlled lands over to the state, and I think we've discussed this at this table before. The real concern in both cases is that the pressure will be tremendous to sell off all of these lands for oil and gas and other mineral exploitation. And essentially, I mean, going back to your point about how important our natural lands are to our economy and to our tourism and all of that kind of stuff, losing that to private ownership, I think, would be a tragedy for New Mexico, and a tragedy for the tribes.
Right, right. Interesting. Tom, I want to swing to you, but I want to get away from the environment. We've got so many topics here. I'm interested in you actually on our planning session for this. You made a very interesting point in that regarding the Honeywell Sandia contract. And you know, with this new administration, what's your sense of how that might go?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and you know, when it comes to how our labs and defense is positioned in New Mexico, I think New Mexico is positioned probably more favorably than any other part of the country. And the reason why is that in addition to Sandia taking care of climate control or addressing climate control, they also oversee thermonuclear climate control. And based on the rhetoric that's going back and forth, that kind of rhetoric, while very dangerous from a safety perspective and how people feel about how things are in the world, that translates into additional projects and missions out at Sandia and Los Alamos National Laboratory. And so with the changeover with Honeywell coming in and Lockheed Martin moving out, I think that there's a couple of upsides here. One is Honeywell, very proven defense contractor. They went in with a game plan, and I think that game plan also includes larger participation in the Albuquerque Albuquerque and New Mexico markets. And so, I think we could see, just as a larger change management kind of approach, more involvement in the labs and what's happening in Albuquerque and in New Mexico. But from a Department of Energy perspective, I'm not too concerned because I believe that our national labs are going to get their work.
Okay, interesting. Would you agree with that? Are we in good shape? Are you feeling the same thing, Christine?
Well, no, I'm not feeling.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling good about a whole lot.
Yeah.
In addition to, let me mention one key point, and it goes back to the environment. In the two excellent articles we read, also in preparation for today, and I'll mention the Santa Fe Reporter's comprehensive review. One of the things that struck me was that Governor Martinez apparently has really put into place a number of actions that dismantle regulations, go after environmental protections, really takes on, really promotes oil and gas, some would say at the expense of environmental concerns, pollution, fighting pollution, so on and so forth. To the extent that Martinez's administrative agenda is supported then by the federal overlay of a Trump administration, we're really looking at a big hit on those forces or those interests that want to protect research on climate change and do something about protecting the environment. So it'll be vice versa. Martinez can implement things that come down from the
And this has been a bit of a trend, the states doing these kind of things, and now we've got a
Absolutely.
situation.
But now let's look at some other issues. I'm thinking of three in particular domestically that will impact us. Education. The Trump administration has named as a cabinet position, Secretary of Education, a woman who believes in further privatization of public education, public schools.
Right.
Again, it would coincide with some of Martinez's priorities.
Good point.
Taking public dollars and putting them into funding religious schools or private education, charter schools and so on. We're looking at issues of health and what happens if the Medicaid expansion, of which Governor Martinez actually
Totally
supported.
Right.
But what happens if the Republicans in Congress start to deal with taking away Medicaid dollars?
That's right.
And then finally immigration. I mean, we're looking at our states' bilateral agreements and development business on the border. And now it is not so simple as us versus them. It never has been that simple since the 19th century.
That's right.
We're talking about integrated goods, services, economies, and people,
right.
labor going back and forth.
That's right.
And so it's going to have tremendous implications for how our border communities survive economically and what are going to happen to Mexican immigrants and others.
That's right.
In terms of whether we criminalize their presence or we integrate them into our social and political and civil structure.
That's a very interesting point, or many interesting points there. I appreciate that a bunch. Another one, Sophie, that's out there is the ACA, of course. The pick for Health and Human Services, Representative Tom Price, he's on the record as saying he's not so crazy about
it.
it.
He hates
Exactly
it.
right.
And I think there's real concern, and it's quite acute right now, to borrow a term from the hospital industry. New Mexico saw an incredible increase in the number of insured people under the ACA. And what I think is fascinating is that within New Mexico, the greatest percentage of people who became insured under the ACA are in Steve Pierce's district.
Yes.
And Steve Pierce is very much on record saying that he wants to see the ACA go down. I think that that's going to make a really interesting piece of dissonance down there in his part of the state.
We're at a minute here, and I want to stay on this ACA thing. I just want to float something out to you guys. I cannot see how any representative going into this next cycle, Republican or Democrat, who would vote to end their constituents' health care, Mary Torres,
correct.
how does that work? I mean, that would be a death knell, it would seem to me.
Exactly.
That you're really going to snatch away somebody's health care
Right.
and expect to get put back in office after that. Something very
Well,
odd there.
especially since the governor supported that, and we've
Right.
got 300,000 New Mexicans that are
The point was
that are
proven.
having that.
Absolutely.
So it has helped. So I don't know. I think it's going to be they're going to be very hard pressed.
Right, exactly right.
do that.
Yeah, please, Kristen.
Well, I would just say that we're dealing with the politics of symbolism a little bit here, as opposed to substance.
Yeah.
And even at the federal level, and especially looking at dismantling and repealing Obamacare, they're talking about, okay, something they can say is repealed, it's going to be repealed, but when, how, what's going to be in its place, that's the substance.
That's right. I've heard down the road, there's some years down the road to actually roll this back.
They're dodging it right
Exactly,
now.
right. Interesting. Tom, finish up for us if you would.
Yeah.
We've got about 30 seconds.
So just from disclosure, we do a lot of work with do the public relations for the New Mexico Health Insurance Exchange, and there's a lot of great successes to tell. But I think to what Christine and others are talking about is that there's this whole approach of shock and awe. Okay, the Trump administration right now is coming in; they are hitting all these issues. Right, it's like Norman Schwarzkopf hitting the beaches. Right,
name from the past.
and and what's happening is there's so many different possibilities that it's freaking out a lot of folks.
Yes.
And what that's allowing them to do is to really kind of work on their ground game, and so they can really identify what substantive changes do they really want to make. There will be changes in the Affordable Care Act, but it's not going to be blown up and dissolved, and health care possibly won't be taken away. But that's the ground game that they're working right now.
Pardon me, right there. Now, that's all the time we have. In a few minutes, we'll talk about how the city of Albuquerque is using bonds that don't have to be approved by voters.